The topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Welcome to the Camping Show. I'm CW Getz. It is Wednesday, February 2nd, 2022. We have got a 16-degree windy. I think it stopped snowing, but it was snowing for just about since yesterday afternoon, so almost 24 hours. But we were supposed to have a big major snowstorm. Didn't quite happen that way, so we're all good with that. But it is a little windy, drifting snow around here. But we are looking at, I think, 40 degrees, 40-some degrees next week. So we're looking forward to that. We can go out and go back to the hiking thing, which I really enjoy. But tonight's episode is when accidents happen with our special guest, Moose Mutlow. But tonight's episode is brought to you by Campground Views, making camping easier, Rutabaga Paddle Sports, providing time on the water, and by NovaCraft Canoe. Moose Mutlow has over 30 years of traditional and alternative education experience around the globe. He has course-directed 58-day outward-bound instructor trainings in Alpaca. He's been a deputy headmaster in the Kalahari Desert, managed a beach concession on the Mediterranean, slogged through Australian rainforests with middle school students, juggled as a street performer, has over 2,000 days of field instruction in a wilderness setting, and he spent 4 months as the interim head for an elite ski academy and has recently returned from teaching a canoe program for veterans on the Gulf of Mexico. Since 2002, Moose has been a member and a senior trainer of Yosemite Search and Rescue, working as a technician and with an incident command at one of the busiest search and rescue operations in the world. He currently works for Nature Bridge in Yosemite National Park as the Senior Projects Director for Planning, Design, and Construction of the National Environmental Science Center, and has been a lead trainer for Family Liaison Officers for the National Park Service, teaching trainings in Yosemite, Arches, Smoky Mountains, Teton, and Yellowstone National Parks. Well, with that, welcome to the show, Moose.
How you doing?
How's your weather there, sir?
It's unseasonably warm.
What's unseasonably warm?
Trees in blossom.
How
Well, it was freezing this morning. It was freezing this morning, and now you can wander around with a t-shirt. So.
Oh wow! So like 85 degrees.
Not quite that, but it is too warm.
That'd be wishful thinking, wouldn't it? Yeah. Well, let's start by this. What type of accidents are you most frequently called upon to respond to, and what's the most common cause of those accidents?
So most of the accidents in the parks are either people just getting dehydrated because they're really excited to get out on a hike and they don't take enough water with them, or they trip and they twist their ankle or get lost. Those are kind of the frequent call outs, or it's a combination thereof. We call it the cascade effect, where you might not take enough water with you and then you end up losing your balance a little bit and then you twist your ankle. So there's 2 or 3 pieces in there that lead to the call out.
You know, I never would have thought of that, but I'm sure that does. Yeah. And maybe a little disoriented if you get dehydrated enough, maybe possibly, right?
So yeah, people for our park, they come from sea level and then they go straight up to 6, 7, 8,000 feet and they get start to get the hit of altitude.
Yeah.
And they're not quite ready for it. They're just so excited to get to a peak or to get to that lake or that campsite. And they just start making elementary mistakes and those just build up.
Is there such a thing as climbing too high too quickly?
Yeah, you can do that. I mean, people feel the effects of altitude at maybe 9,000-10,000 feet typically. Some people lower in extreme case.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you're not fully hydrated, you're not used to altitude, you're going to feel the effects really quickly. And it's going to be at a position where you physically slow down and start making poorer decisions.
Oh, sure. And I'm sure everyone is a little bit different how they respond to that elevation thing.
Oh yeah, I'm awful at elevation. I went up to Denali to do a search and rescue patrol,
yeah.
and I discovered that I really despise mountaineering. And
Oh, wow.
yet there were people there who love it, and they'll be really uncomfortable, and that's all they'll do is mountaineering. So you find your jam.
You find your jam. I love it. So what other types of accidents do you encounter up there? I mean, or in the park, any park for that matter.
Where I specialize is in swiftwater. I'm a swiftwater trainer in the park.
Mm-hmm.
So we train to be around water and to help some people, but for the most part, 2/3 of the calls I've been out on swiftwater are recoverers. So it's people who've drowned and searches for people who are in the water.
Now, these are swimmers or boaters or both?
It's generally people who just wanted to get a little bit closer to the edge and did not anticipate the force of the water or their exposure to the edge. They just didn't think it through. They're too excited. They're distracted.
Wow. So, I mean, they actually literally fall off ledges and things like that.
We've had people go off the top of 700-foot waterfalls, 1,000-foot waterfalls.
Oh, wow.
Or someone crossing a creek during snowmelt, and they're not a experienced backpacker, and they've made an elemental mistake in selecting the crossing point, and they've got out in chest-deep water, and the water's taken them, and they have a matter of moments to get back in control, and they get unlucky.
Yeah. And we talk about that. We've talked about that in several episodes before, and in swift water where there's a current. I mean, you really have to be careful with that. How far you go into that and cross.
You wouldn't play on the side of a motorway, of a highway. Exactly. You wouldn't stand in that pull-off lane and just get as close to that truck going by you at 70 miles an hour. And people don't have the same stop in their brain of getting close to that water. They just don't perceive it as a threat, and yet it is.
Until it is. Yeah, right. And now, do you typically ever see kayakers, things like that? Are you involved in those type of rescue operations?
I have. My background is in guiding, so I've done big major trips up in the Arctic or trips in the West, and you come across people who've had accidents. I've dealt with entrapment where a boat has folded around a rock and the person has been trapped in it, and you've had to swim out and get them.
Oh yeah, wow.
And the nature of the water community is, if you see an accident, you respond. And so any boater out there has probably got a good array of stories of near misses or saves.
Yeah, I'm sure. Absolutely. Well, what sort of lesson or lessons should people take away from the situations that you just described?
I think be prepared, and that means water, food, gear that you're comfortable in. Set realistic goals. Don't be over ambitious about what you want to go, and don't be afraid to turn around.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
I let people know where you're going. I mean, the amount of times we respond because we don't have a location or we're not sure where somebody is because somebody hasn't left a plan. Those are the lessons.
Do you find? Go ahead.
And I think the key there is, I always tell people, the best stories are the ones you get to tell yourself.
Yeah, right.
So,
right.
So don't be the story.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah. You don't want to be the story. That's not any good. Do you find that since cell phones have become so popular, in fact, and I'm not sure what category you call these, but like the InReach devices, do you find GPS devices, I guess, do you find that these accidents there are more reportings? I mean, they're faster, more effective and things. I'm sure you would say they are, but I mean, have you noticed this huge difference, huge increase in response time and things like that because of those devices, cell phones?
I think people have got savvier in using them. The early iterations sort of essentially had a panic button that people would just hit because they were freaking out. We had one where a guy said he had a cardiac arrest, and we went out to get him, and he'd moved. And actually, what he was experiencing was altitude. His heart was quickening, and he was like freaking out and having a heart attack. And then he went down, and he felt better. And he said, "Oh, I'm feeling better." And then he went up again. He thought he was having another heart attack.
Wow.
So those things can cloud what the actual incident is.
Yeah.
But I think anything that gets people in the outdoors safely or allows them to explore, we need constituents in the outdoors. We need people to use it. And it's easy to say, oh, that one's a bad one. But overall, that it's a good development if it's used wisely.
So, and this is what I'm learning, is there are people that when you're doing the climbs and things like that, and you're dealing with some altitude, it sounds like there are some things you really need to do a little research about, what kind of effects this may have on your body, before doing such an adventure. Am I right?
Yeah, don't watch a film about Everest and go, I'm going to go and climb a big mountain.
Oh, there you go. That's
I advocate people to serve an apprenticeship and mentorship, and you can get a lot from the web, you can get a lot from books, but to find somebody to help teach you, it's actually the conversations where you build the institutional memory that makes you safe.
oh wow, yeah,
And
that makes perfect sense.
if you do everything on your own, you don't have the benefit of that person being like, oh, that doesn't feel right, or agreeing that let's do the most conservative thing here, let's do the safest thing here. And the beauty of an outdoor experience is a shared experience on some level.
Mhm.
And that's the thing I benefited from when I was starting, was people teaching me how to do stuff and holding my hand through it as a young person. And I think that's the thing I love about outings clubs or REI offering a teaching class, is to build a community of people to go on adventure with, because that will make you safe.
Yeah, absolutely. It's safer. I like that. Yeah. Um, are there I mean, there are a great number of people, or I should how I want to word this. Percentage wise, what is the percentage of people that don't realize that such training or programs exist and just go off and do things like you said? Hey, I watched this movie. I'm going to go do that.
Well,
And then,
if you've ever seen kids play, 100% of them don't know what they're doing.
right?
Like that's how they build their experience. So I would say it's a very high number.
Oh,
Go
really?
out there. Yeah, and you just kind of push the limit, and you don't know how dangerous you're being, and you're building that experience.
Right.
I think that to get tons and tons of training can be quite stifling, because you want to develop an intuitive response, and that does by just sort of getting out there and doing your thing. If it's fishing,
Of course.
being able to read the weather and the cloud patterns and the score line, you have to be out there. And I think sometimes we put barriers up by making it exclusive. You have to have this piece of gear, or you have to have done this course. You know what? I look at it from a kid's perspective. Kids climb trees and fall out of them all the time, and most of the time they're okay.
Right.
I mean, sort of, don't be crazy with that, but to have that willingness for wonderment and discovery is probably the best place to start going out there and being safer.
Hmm. But don't go blind. Don't go just
No,
absolutely not knowing anything, or I should say naive. But I guess it's one of those things where if I can do this, I can do this, and I can do this, and I can do this, and all of a sudden now maybe you get into a situation like, oh, hey, maybe I can't, maybe I didn't know enough about that, and naivety can be a very serious thing in certain situations.
we had a response from a guy who called in on a very busy day, and we kind of put him in a holding pattern on the big white board.
Okay.
And we said, "Are you stable?" And he said, "Yeah, I'm stable." And then we went back to him hours later and found out where he was. And actually, where he was 1,500 feet up in a corner on a granite cliff, and he'd fallen repeatedly. He'd taken his shoes off, climbing up, and got to a place he couldn't move. And he was staring death in the face for hours. And he just remembered he had his cell phone in his pocket.
Oh, wow.
And he managed to get a cell call out to get a location and got rescued by a helicopter.
Holy smokes.
But the thing for him, he started up a very gentle ramp. And when he started slipping, he took his shoes off and he climbed in his bare feet, and it went vertical. And he just got seduced into that adventure because it seemed easy. It seemed like, oh, I could do this. It's a bit easier. And it's that cascade effect again, where as soon as you take your boots off to do a move, hang on, think twice about it.
Wow.
It's
Yeah, jeez. Well, I've never heard such a story. That's interesting. Wow.
And that young man came out of the helicopter, and the crew came through to debrief him, and he had the 1,000-yard stare. Like, he had faced death. He had absolutely faced his mortality.
Wow.
And Paul Petzold talks about bad experiences leading to good judgment. If you interviewed him 10 years later, I'm pretty sure he'll be like, oh, I learned a really valuable
Yeah, I'm
lesson
sure
there.
he did. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's let me ask you real quick about this here. We're gonna take a commercial break. But what would you say? I mean, you've had a lot. I mean, you have lots and lots of experience. I mean, everywhere overseas and everything. And it was a thrill to talk to you doing the prelim here that we do for the show. I'm like, wow, this is going to be a great episode. What's the most? And I know this is going to be tough. What is the most traumatic situation that you have ever had to respond to?
When
If
you
you
know
had to pick one.
when you know the person that you're responding to.
Oh wow, yeah.
We live in small communities, and in adventure sports, you have connection. And I've had the unfortunate piece of responding to people I know.
Man, that has to be, um, wow. I mean, does something change in you when that happens, when you have to respond to a friend or a family member or something like that? I mean, does something click in your head going, "Okay, I can't think about that. I have to
Well,
focus on my job."
for me, because I'm responding in a communication level of working with families quite often with those is
Right.
uh I actually had a physical reaction. I actually sort of went all wobbly when we knew the person had died, and I was stepped out of the role because I had this physical reaction to facing this trauma. And another case of a colleague of mine ended their life, who's a law enforcement ranger,
Oh,
and
wow.
in talking on the phone during the assignment, so I'm being sent out, I hadn't got a name, and then as we talked, we realized that I knew the person really well. You have to take a step back
You
because you can't serve at that point. You're
Yeah, you
talking.
you you really wouldn't be very effective if your brain is wrapped around something else and you can't focus on your duty, am I right?
Well, we took in the roles that I play, we talk about compassionate objectivity. The idea that you can empathize, you can show compassion, but you have to be objective to help people.
Yeah. Yeah. That's man, that's amazing. Um, what now back to that question, what is the most if you had to pick one or maybe two, what's the most traumatic situation that you've encountered that you've had to respond to?
I did a body recovery probably 20 years ago, and it was my first real drowning recovery. And it was in the river, and we had really big haul systems. You have to equal or exceed the power of the water to remove the body from the entrapment.
Mhm.
And we tried for a long time to get him out, and we couldn't. And I actually just said to somebody, what happens if we actually use so much force that his body comes apart?
Oh, wow.
And then we pulled him out, and it happened like 10 feet up in front of me. And I remember looking at that image. I starkly remember what he looked like, his face. I remember he was only wearing one sock. The river had taken his clothing, and his sort of uncompliance in death. The water was moving him around, and I was asked to sort of pull him in, and I froze. I from from the moment he came out to when we had put him in the bag, we transported him out. I have no recollection. I
Wow.
remember he only had one sock on. I remember his face, and that exposure. Think of all the responders around the country. They're facing that level of exposure every single day and carrying it with them. And so that stress is cumulative unless you're actually managing it. And that's for trauma, as much as we see all these images, it's how do you manage that trauma in a healthy manner?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I can imagine 2 things. First of all, I can imagine these things waking you up in the middle of the night in your sleep, nightmares. Does that ever happen with you? I know you
Oh
can't
yeah,
speak to other.
I did like 7 or 8 deaths in a really short period of time. And
Wow.
I was at an event, a fundraising event for the nonprofit I work for. It's a board meeting.
Mhm.
And I'd come from this really involved operation, and I'd gone to this cocktail evening, and I had a beer, and somebody said, "Are you okay?" And I just burst into tears, and
Wow.
I said, "No, I'm not." And I was messed up for a while. And it was only through sort of work around something called the Stress Continuum, which is this responders use. It was developed by the military, and now it's got a form that responders use.
Okay.
That identify the impact of trauma and stress, that actually helps you map out what you're experiencing and then gives you a guide to get back to what we call green, to being ready, to being functional.
Okay, this is a psychological therapy that you have to undergo.
Yeah, and essentially deep trauma leaves you. Everybody experiences trauma at some point in their life, as a child, as a parent, as a partner, whatever it is, we experience it.
Right.
And if you look at trauma as a definition of not allowing you to live the life you want to live, the key part in that is the inability to deal with complexity. So I got to a point where I'd open the fridge and I couldn't decide what was going to go in the sandwich because there was too much choice in there.
Oh, wow.
So I would shut the fridge and walk away because it was better to be hungry than to deal with that complexity.
Yeah.
That's what trauma does.
That's amazing. That is amazing. I guess, and I don't think most of us would even consider that what you guys really go through until you hear someone like yourself speak about it and say, no, this is how it goes. This is how it works. And here are some of the effects thereof. Am I right?
Yeah. And if you're I've had the experience too many times where you're sitting on the phone and there is a noise that a mother makes when she hears she has lost a child. And it's out of this world. Like the hair's going up on my arms right now as I tell this story. It always does. And you hear this noise and it is deeply affecting because what you're hearing is that pain, that loss, all of this nightmare. And if you feel nothing, what can you give somebody in pain? We have to be human.
Yeah.
And to be human is to be vulnerable. And I think we've moved from this just suck it up, the British call stiff upper lip, like sort of denial of emotion, to a much healthier piece with things like the Stress Continuum, where we could talk about emotion and we could seek professional care. We can have our peer groups recognize when we're struggling, and also start to talk about difficult things like using substances in a way that's self-destructive, or relationships that are self-destructive. We have better tools to be healthy. But you should give every responder that you meet casually, ask their permission, is give them a hug, because they have a very, very hard job, and COVID's pushed us over the edge, and the trauma of veteran suicide has pushed us over there. All these things are conspiring to make us a traumatized society. And at its heart, being kind will go a long way to getting people to be functional and deal with complexity.
Hear, hear. Absolutely. Well said. Well said. Moose, we're going to take a break here, but don't go away. We'll be back with more of The Camping Show and Moose Mutlow, and we've got some more questions for you, Moose. We'll be back on W4CY Radio and Talk 4 TV after these messages.
Time to go camping. Introducing Campground View's virtual tours. You can tour the campground, see the sites, see if they are available, and click to book your perfect spot. Hit the open road and explore the amazing places found in nature. We make it easy to discover, find, and book your site so that you can go have the fun and freedom you seek. Campground View's virtual tours make it easy and simple for you to see where you are going.
A few years ago, someone asked Rutabaga's owner, Darren Bush, "Hey, how long have you guys been selling boats?" Darren replied, "We don't sell boats. We sell time on the water." Of course, that comes in all types. We help people paddle more safely with Rutabaga outdoor programs. We rent canoes, kayaks, and stand-up paddleboards. We sell and install racks to get you from home to adventure. Rutubaga's got everything you need to get you out on the water, like paddles, life jackets, dry bags, and clothing. Rutabaga Paddle Sports, on the web at rutabaga.com. Mention you saw this ad on The Camping Show.
There's nothing like being out there. For over 50 years, we've been connecting people with nature by building classic Canadian canoe designs using the best materials available. We built a reputation on durable, dependable canoes that allow you to focus on what's important, whether that's unplugging in remote wilderness, spending quality time with your favorite people, or nailing the perfect line. Visit novacraft.com to find the perfect canoe for you and locate your nearest authorized dealer.
And we're back with our guest, Moose Mutlow, here on the Camping Show. Roxy, could we have you put Moose's photos up? And we are going to have him tell us a little bit about him. I kind of skipped ahead here, Moose, because we answered some of these questions that I had written down.
That's okay.
I'm like, it's great, you know. Roxy's like, hey, give me a minute, man. I wasn't prepared, so I apologize. My producer, sorry. She just do a fantastic job, by the way, but I just threw her under the bus, so I'm sorry about that, Roxy. But anyway, there we go. All right. Thank you, Roxy. All right. What are we looking at here, Moose?
That is me on a riverboard, which is a high flotation rescue device that we use surfing the wave that's down in, used to be on the Merced River. It's this setup is what we use to actually go out and get people if they're stranded on rocks or on islands. It's a much quicker deployment than a boat.
Okay.
And you generally, the operator, which is me in that case, you're more on the back, and you would put somebody on the board and have them pulled back over to the side. They get a bit excited. It's definitely something that you have to hold on to people. It's a bit grippy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's no pulleys involved there or anything like that. It's just a carabiner, and you're
Oh, yeah.
sliding that along the rope. Okay.
Super simple systems. You don't have, the more complexity you built into a system, the less flexibility you have. So what you want to do is you want to have something that's easy to replicate.
Yeah.
So I carry 3 carabiners, a big piece of nylon webbing, and that's all I need to do most of the rescues I do.
And I would imagine the time it would take to put something together like those, more complex system. You don't have that kind of time, right?
Not if you've got somebody who's above the water. If you've got a recovery, you've got all the time in the world.
Well, yeah, right, of course. Yeah.
But and then the systems in recovery tend to have more complexity because it's harder to get them out.
Yeah.
This is me in really big water. This is 5,000 cubic feet per second.
Whoa.
Which is a large amount of water.
Whoa.
And it's probably pumping at 15 miles an hour. You'd be running pretty hard to keep up on the edge.
Oh,
and this is a training run up at Happy Isles, which is on the top end of Yosemite Valley. And it's just a place to go out there and get tested a bit and get out on the edge. When we're training, a lot of times you're figuring out where your limit is. And you're going to operate below your limit. You're not going to operate at your limit.
Yeah.
And I'm wearing a dry suit there, which is with a thermal layer underneath, and that's snow melt. I think that's like April or May. It's full snow melt. It was ice a few hours before.
Holy smokes.
It's hard on your hands. After about 15 minutes, it's harder to grip.
I can imagine.
And then you just do circuits. You're just building your resilience through circuits. You just repeat.
Hey, just real briefly, since you touched on that, what is your thermal base layer underneath that dry suit?
It's a onesie. Guys. It's a really fashionable pile onesie.
Is it merino wool or anything like that?
No. It's a nylon. It's like just a standard pile sort of setup. Okay. You can't have a lot of bulk because you still got to be able to move.
Right.
And then you vent. You squeeze all the air out of it, so it wraps around you, so it's really tight, and you're dry and cold. And most of them leak. They tend to have little bits of wear. So at the end, you might have a foot full of water. But that gives you hours in the water. That might be 3 or 4 hours of operations. A wetsuit, it might be faster to deploy as a swimmer, but I'm going to have a lot less time that I can be in the water at that time.
Yeah, it makes sense.
This is training systems. So that's pyramid rock with some hydraulics. There's some water that's recirculating a lot more violently than you think, and that's about 4 or 5 feet deep out there. Mm-hmm. And we're just running rotations of throwing ropes, pulling people backwards and forwards as a training exercise.
Okay.
And this would be like what you call about class 3 water. And for an inexperienced person going from left to right off that drop, that's a classic pace where you get a vertical pin, where somebody's feet go down to the bottom of the river, and then the
Yeah.
force of the water folds them over, and that's where you would look for an entrapment.
Yeah.
This is the bottom of one of the big waterfalls. We've actually got swimmers out in the water here. This is on a search for a missing person, and I've
Okay.
probably got 2 or 3 people out on the water, and I'm giving a sign about the transect I want them to go and look at. And I've got a spotter above me who's telling me what's going on
Oh, I
and
see.
where they
Okay.
are in that big pool.
Okay.
And right to the right of this is a waterfall that's 700 feet high, and it's probably running, I don't know, 5,000, 4,000 cubic feet per second. And we'll free dive and snorkel in this.
Yeah. It's a lot of water.
It's a lot of force.
Yeah.
This was me actually. I worked for Outward Bound, which works in the outdoors around personal development, and I went back to work in the Everglades after a 30-year break to work with a veterans program run by the North Carolina Outward Bound School. And this is right out on the north end of the Everglades National Park. And we've done a 5-day trip of reflection and adventure out on those outer islands. And there are dolphins playing and
Oh, wow.
ospreys catching fish and manatees. And it's just this amazing healing landscape. And for
Yeah.
veterans, it's a chance to be in their family and talk about shared experience and move towards some level of common understanding or healing. They're
That's
powerful
amazing.
programs.
Yeah, that sounds excellent.
This is us. You transition from day 1 to day 5 where you give increasing control over to a group. And this group was extraordinary because on day 1, they were highly functioning on navigation and skills. And this is them deciding about what their next move's going to be across a big open water crossing. They're going to cross just about a mile offshore around the Boundary Islands. And they're just getting themselves sort of in the headspace to head out. They were an amazing group. They were really fun to be with.
Hey,
That's
there we
the
go.
book.
Yeah. The book. We're going to talk
That's my
about
book. Yeah, that was my COVID project. I had the time to sit down and write a book, which
Yeah.
it turned out to be a cathartic experience, to say the least.
I'll bet. And is that the last? It must be the last photo. Okay, I guess it is. Well, I'm going to ask you that, Moose. Tell us about the Family Liaison Officer, or FLO, part of the search and rescue work that you're involved with.
So the Family Liaison Officer is the incident commander's representative to the family. So you're high up in incident command.
Okay.
And you are the conduit for information to flow from the person who's in charge of the mission to the family, so they know what's going on. And then for the family to ask questions and come back to command, and then you figure out how to answer them. And the key part in that is you're a conduit for information. You work not for the family, you work for the incident command, but you're presenting a consistent, accessible face to the operation. So you never want to have that position where somebody says, I don't know what's going on. I want to give them maps. I want to give them overviews. I want to give them the planning assignments, tell them how many people we have in the field. Or I want to tell them on the other end, hey, we've done the recovery. We've got your loved one's bodies back. Do you want to do a viewing before they head off to the funeral home? So it's it can last an hour as an assignment. I've had assignments last 6 and 7 months.
Wow. You know, and there is only one person, this liaison person. It is not a group like maybe with the police or something like that, where you're going through 4 different people before the message actually, the information actually reaches the family from,
So the idea is to have a single point of contact, so there's no confusion.
Exactly.
So as a family liaison officer, I've rotated out of assignments after a week, and somebody else has come in for a couple of days to give me a break, and then I've rotated back in. And in investigations with law enforcement, you'll see a family liaison officer, maybe an investigator, will be assigned and they have a dual role. That happens in Britain a lot. But it's in search and rescue, it's good because if you can put somebody who's got a practitioner background like myself, vertical world or in the water, who understands the terminology, can give it in an accessible manner, that is a really powerful thing, because people are just looking for information. They not necessarily answers, they want information, and they want to be respected, and they want to be heard, and they want to be able to, in a fatality, quite often people just want to tell you about the person who died, and they tell you these great stories. I mean, they're sad. I've had incidents where people have told these outrageous stories, and we've just been laughing shortly after notification because the person has had such an amazing life. I worked on a death where somebody died in the park, and they just told me about all the adventures they'd done in Yosemite National Park and this lifetime of exploration. And they were coming to terms with the person dying in the place they loved. And it was just sharing. And that's all we have to do. We're as much as we're giving facts, we're listening.
And I'm sure and doing so was very therapeutic for them.
It's a start.
Sure.
We're not going to fix anything.
No, of course not. Right.
But within that culture around death, people are often like, "Oh, I don't know what to do." And actually, you just sort of reach out and be like, "I'm going to sit here and I'm going to be a witness." And there isn't a guidebook to death or dealing with that sort of level of trauma. You just have to be present and be kind. People say these things that are terrible. They're dealing with a really bad event. Don't take it personally.
Absolutely.
I'm a happy guy. I'm a very upbeat guy. I'm not going to sit there and make inappropriate jokes, but I am present when they have this struggle. And if you do it, if you're kind at the start and you listen to people and you give them facts and you give them undeniable truth, you're at least putting them on that first step of the grieving process where they trust what they're being told. And then we're not going beyond the incident. We don't do prolonged grief counseling or anything like that. We need professionals to do that. But you're helping them at the start by being respectful.
That is so important. I mean, you're the person right there, the first one who's giving
I had an incident where somebody had a terrible, the family had a terrible interaction with law enforcement. And so I'm not law enforcement, but I work within Incident Command, and they got out of their vehicle and they just went for me verbally. And 2 days later, they turned around and apologized. But they also said, in all their time within working in and around law enforcement, this was the most respect they've been given. This made it easier for them to actually trust what we were saying. And they had this deep history, and it's complicated, and it's not for me to judge. It's for me to be supportive in that moment and try to find places to help.
And it takes a very special person to be able to be what that situation, in that situation that you are, and perform that duty that you perform.
It's attainable. Like, I wrote the book so that any layperson who's a kind person can look at it and say, hey, I can actually help with that. And you don't have to be the lead person. You can be the second person, and you can support the person doing the job. And the loss, or if somebody ends their life, their suicide, it's very isolating because people don't know what to say. And actually, just being around and maybe saying the wrong thing and sort of being, sorry about that, I'm just trying to be helpful here. That's okay. We shouldn't be frightened of that. It's
human,
right? And when you've been around death a lot, you come to terms with it pretty quickly. We live fragile lives, and we're all going to face it. And I just hope that there's somebody there to support my family if something were to happen. So we do what we can, and modeling being generous now.
Yeah, absolutely, makes perfect sense. Yeah, and I hope you're right with that. And it does make, once you go through things like that, I'm sure that, Moose, you don't get too upset when your car doesn't start.
No, you do have a very good sense of perspective. Like,
right.
But again, when you have trauma, you lose that perspective because you can't deal with complexity. So it's this journey. You just on it, and you just try to look at yourself and look at your effect on other people and be accountable.
Yeah, that's great advice. Moose, tell us a little bit about this book that you've written on being a family liaison officer and the challenge of crisis communication.
So the idea of crisis communication is actually predominantly is listening to people and
Right.
not telling them what they're feeling was wrong.
I'm sure.
Like,
I'm sure.
you
Yeah.
know, like people
they
say
don't need
crazy
that.
stuff. They say crazy stuff, and you're like, okay, like you don't have to explain anything. And the book's laid out to help people understand how to help, particularly within the search and rescue context or within athletics program. And it's crisis communication is predominantly listening. It's writing really good notes. It's letting people know you've heard what they've said and then reminding them what they've said and then answering those questions.
Yeah.
So there's
right.
a lot of notes backwards and forwards to make sure that they've registered what you've said or what they've said because they forgot it in the moment.
Mhm.
So I do a lot of handwritten notes and times and dates and show people, and you hold that copy, I've got this copy, and you're basically building the foundation for their recovery.
Right.
And not when I say recovery, I'm not saying they're going to be better, but that movement towards dealing with complexity.
Yeah, the entire process. Yeah. That's interesting. So you and I guess I didn't realize that you would actually take physical notes and write all this down. A lot of things.
Oh
down.
yeah, I've had people like drop a camera in my face and digitally record everything I'm saying.
Oh,
and then
wow.
send it off to their family. Or you're sitting in an office and you're FaceTiming with all these family members from all over the world, or using Google Translate to talk to a foreign national about the loss of their child. Like there's places for technology, but nothing replaces a handwritten note that you sign and they watch you write.
Yeah.
It's personal, and in an impersonal experience, that's really important. That's human. That's the piece I was talking about earlier. It's human.
Yeah, absolutely. I can definitely see that. Let me ask you this here as we wind down last couple of minutes we've got here. As a search and rescue professional, what message would you like to send or like you'd rather share with all of our viewing adventurers?
Don't be scared, be prepared. That's what I would say. It's if you want to go out there and have an adventure, take the time to read stuff up, think about what happens if your first line of redundancy of help is what you know. And then it's not your gear, it's what you know. So think through what you're going to do if you twisted your ankle 5 miles in, or if you ran out of water, there's no water at that cache. Think through those scenarios. And the other thing I tell people is get a buddy to go and do stuff with, because two minds are a lot more fun and there's a lot more resources there. And then you learn off of each other, and it might be a mentor apprenticeship setup, or it might be just somebody that you like feel really comfortable with. But those are the things I say. And I think there's a culture that laughs at people's failure. We enjoy it. And actually that repels people from going on other adventures. And I've had so many minor disasters in my life on the outdoors. Those are all the rich experiences that make me safe today.
You know, that's some very, very sound advice. I mean, that's wonderful. I appreciate that. Lastly, I want to ask you this. Where can our viewers and listeners find you on social media, find your website, and go to purchase your book?
You can get my book on Amazon, or you can actually go to any bookstore and order when accidents happen. And a good place to look for the numbers of what have you on Amazon. I'm on Instagram at Moose Mutlow, and I have a website, www.moosemutlow.com.
That's fantastic. Well, Moose, I'd like to thank you for being my guest here on the Camping Show this evening. It was an absolute pleasure to interview you, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for giving me the chance to chat about this stuff, and have a great 2022. Be safe.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and you're very welcome. I'd like to also thank our sponsors, Campground Views, Rutabaga Paddle Sports, Novacraft Canoe, for bringing you tonight's show. Be sure to tune in for next week's episode, exploring the benefits of stick stoves, with our special guests, Kent Herring and Summer Nitch. Until then, thank you for tuning into the Camping Show. This is C.W. Getz reminding you, learn more, do more. See you next week.